How are we doing, everybody? Welcome to the very first trade recap. What we're going to be doing today is breaking down a trade that we took on Thursday, which was a short where we caught the swing lower high, which then, as the ECB news press conference came out, ended up to be a massive 1-to-100 plus trade. So what we're going to be doing, as we normally do, is we're going to break this down from a top-down analysis. We're not going to go into things too much in detail, but we are going to start from top-down, talk about expectations, build on narrative and our understanding from what we've been forecasting since quantum began, and everything has been playing out how we expected to. And what we're going to be doing is starting from that top down, making our way to intraday, and then also showing entry executions and targets as well. So what we can see here first, like we normally do, we start on the daily chart. Now, pretty much since the beginning of March, we've been continuously been in our bearish structure, but obviously our most recent breaker structure bearish on the daily was followed by this breaker structure right here. So we understand the structural expectation of bearish market structure is to see a new lower high in the market before a new lower low, okay? Our structural expectation never changes. When we've had a bearish break of structure, this leaves behind protected highs and weak lows. So the weak lows have a structural expectation to come and get ran, and we never assume otherwise, okay? Because we understand then that once we get a break of structure of protected levels, this changes our directional bias. So right now on the daily, our structural expectation was to see a new lower high in the market before we saw a new lower low, okay? Now we understand that this was our swing structure, but what we need to understand is how to read the internal structure within. Now the internal structure does not change the directional bias of our swing structure. What we can see here is that within our bearish swing structure, you can see we were putting in our bullish complex pullback. Now we understood this bullish structure that we had was internal to the bearish swing structure. So we weren't having an expectation of taking longs here and targeting for price to come in, target all the way up in here, because we understand we're still contained within a bearish protected swing structure essentially. So this was protected, this was weak, this was always our expectation to come and get ram, and then this was all the internal structure within. So we can see here that we started to get this bullish complex pullback, and then what did we see right here? We saw we got a mitigation into this whole level of supply right here. This is a supply range, and it was this daily level here. We can see that it was in premium pricing. It was a perfectly valid level for price to come and mitigate to then potentially come and fulfill the expectation to come and take the weak daily lower low, okay? We couldn't assume that it was going to just yet because we understood internally that we still had protected bullish structure. So even if we got this mitigation right here, as price started to pull back down here, only until we got this internal structural break bearish did we have true structural confirmation that price then was going to come and take this lower low, because we understand we never assume structure. So when we have protected structure internally being bullish, so we have protected lows in the market, we never assume structure is going to get broken. We can assume that price could, but the way that we manage and position ourselves in the market, what we're trying to do is understand the swing levels on the swing structures we have. And what we need to do is understand where our protected, where our weak levels are, where are we positioned when we're in a trade at this moment in time, and how do we manage accordingly, according to the intentions of that structure that we see. So if we see right here now, what did we get? We got our bearish internal breaker structure. Okay, so this gave us now and signifying to us now that we've had potential structural alignment occur to come and take this lower low here now, this daily low, because we've had now internal structure realign with the swing structure. So when we got this internal breaker structure right here, what did this leave? This left behind a new protected internal lower high. So we've now had the internal structure and the swing structure both being bearish, okay? So now this gave us good confirmation that we could now come and see the daily low come and get taken, because the bullish internal structure that was leaving protected lows has now been broken. We've now then had a breaker structure of the protected low. We've switched bearish internally and left behind a new protected lower high. So now we've had structural alignment. So this was our target to potentially come and get taken, okay? So now one of the most important things we always talk about is we never assume structure. So if we come down now to our 4-hour time frame, and what we're going to do here now is just look and read at the swing structure. So just because we've had this break right here, and this was that sort of internal breaker structure, we need to make sure that we never assume structure. So for example, when we had this major break right here, we can see that some people, for example, might be forecasting, as we see, we've got this liquidity here, you know, we've got available liquidity to come and mitigate potential supply up in here before we get continuation bearish. But the one thing we always say is never assume structure. So what we can see here is this bearish structure being put into play. We saw that we're not going to go into supply and demand ranges from a fractal understanding of structure too much here, because this is something that I really go into in quantum. But we can see here that this was the first lower high, and this was a trade that I caught, and we can see that essentially we had this whole supply range, we had this lower high being put into the market. I caught this lower high as well. And then what have we seen here right now? What was our most recent sort of 4-hour structure? Okay, we could see we had this breaker structure right here. Okay, so when we get a breaker swing structure, what does this leave? This leaves behind new protected and weak levels. Okay, so when we got this bearish breaker structure, what did this leave? This left behind to us now a new protected lower high in the market. And one of the most important things is that structure is always the most important thing when it comes to building our narrative. So even though we had available liquidity, multiple levels of unmitigated supply up in here, and we could say we could potentially see a pullback, we need to just understand what the intention is saying right now. And as it stood at this moment in time, we had this lower low, lower high, lower low, expectation for a new lower high before new lower low. Okay, catching the lower high, looking to come and take the first structural target, being this swing structural leg right here of this lower low, and then eventually to come and see the lower low of the daily come and get taken. Okay, so that was the expectation of this structure. We can also see we had a little form of inducement of available liquidity just above this supply level right here. Okay, so if we just drop down now to the 1-hour time frame, or what we can see here now is when we have a look at this and view this from more of a lower time frame, such being the 1 hour, we understand that what we can see is that bearish structure. Okay, lower low, lower high, lower low. Okay, what did we get here? When we got this, we can see this was that lower low that got put into the market. What could we see? We got an FTC being a fail to close. And when we get a fail to close, what this does is it doesn't change the structural bias of our specific time frame or swing structure. Okay, so when we get an FTC, this signifies for us more of a liquidity sweep than it does of a breaker structure. So what we'll just do now is just go to the 15-minute time frame. Oh, we'll just go to the 4-hour quickly, as we can see. So obviously this was the first initial lower low being put into the market. We can see price came up, price came back down, okay, and this gave us an FTC. So now this new low became our structural target. Okay, price didn't change bullish, and our intentions didn't change to bullish just because we had this minor low break. Okay, all I saw this was an FTC, a liquidity sweep to come and test higher, but we understand our swing structural direction still being bearish, this still being the protected high. Then we just focus this now as being the new targeted weak low. Okay, so this was the expectation of structure we were expecting to see come and get taken. So if we just drop down now to our intraday time frame, being the 15-minute, and what could we see? Okay, so one of the most important things we needed to understand in this moment in time was understanding higher time frame narrative and the objective of the higher time frames. So I knew a couple of people missed out on this position because, for example, they were bullish on the M15 and they were waiting for structural alignment to occur, being the M15 to break bearish in line with the swing structure. Okay, but we needed to stack our confluences and understand what we see in here, right? So we understand on the higher time frame perspective of this, say, 4-hour swing, we are coming up to valid extreme supply levels. Okay, we understand that this being the larger swing from this high to this low. Okay, we could see this was during like sort of coming into Asia. We started to come and start impulsively pushing up, and for me, my protected level on the 15-minute was this low to this high. These were small levels of structure putting in this impulsive move up. Okay, but we need to understand the sort of bigger picture and higher time frame objective here. Okay, so we understand that the 4 hours perspective is to see a new lower low. Okay, we understand that all time frames are bearish. Okay, everything is bearish. Weekly's bearish, daily's bearish, 4 hours bearish, right? 15-minute and 1 hour being bullish, putting in this complex pullback to this larger structure. Okay, so we understand that this is our high time frame target. Okay, so what time frames are going to shift first before the 15-minute? So we understand we never assume structure, but we understand the bigger picture. Okay, so when we get a valid mitigation into our extreme supply level right here, and we start to see that shift, just because M15 is bullish doesn't mean we don't want to be getting in this trade, because we understand the bigger picture play here being an expectation to see this structural low get taken. So what do we have here, right? We had this, this was originally refined to a 30-minute supply level right here. And then what we can see is we can refine it down within here to 15-minute, and then also find our M1 zones, which are our refined zones. And what we can do is we can stack our confluences to our refined zones to pick the best levels to trade from. So I had two refined levels that I was looking at. I had this first level up in here, and I also had this one up here as well. And I'll talk about why I was a little bit more conservative on this entry. I could have got in with a tighter stop loss, but I wanted to be conservative, trading funding, etc. And hence why I went for a bigger stop to be a little bit more conservative, to make sure that I took a safer trade being unfunded. So what we saw here coming into London Open is we could see that we were just getting this bullish order flow being put into the market. We can see bullish ranges continuing to hold until we get a mitigation into a refined M1 level. So It's perfectly valid to potentially look for a seconds entry here, but I understood the higher probable levels being above, being this supply level right here, and the more refined zones at the top. So I wanted to wait for a little bit more structural confirmation to come and take a short to look for a seconds entry here, okay? I wanted to wait for a little bit more confirmation. So as we got the mitigation into supply, I wanted to wait to see what we got, okay? So as we can see, I'm not going to go in and talk about how we view these structural ranges, but we can see here that when we just think about things with the change of character, what can we see here, right? We can see we took this high, we took this low. We got a mitigation into our supply level, and we got our change of character. Now what we understand is the change of character is that first shift in order flow, but it doesn't mean that we've had structural confirmation that price wants to come, in our case, bearish just yet, okay? Because we're still contained within a bullish swing structure. So the change of character gives you that first indication of the trend change, and you can still look to get involved, hence why I got involved in the short. So we got a mitigation into our refined supply, and we can see that we got the M1 change of character. Now when we came to look to execute this trade, I had a look at the impulsive move down, and I had to look and see where was the most high probable refined supply level. Okay, we can see we got these sell to buy wicks here, and we got the flip here, so we can see that this buy to sell wicks reacted to these sell to buy wicks. We had interaction here, and price came back down. This didn't react to anything to the left, and we got a small reaction to here, and there wasn't much significance in that sort of reaction. So I was really focused on this supply level right here, okay? We also look at the range EQ refinement that we've got, and we can see here that this POI was in the top 50%, okay? So for me, this POI stacked a lot of confluence. It lines up with our higher time frame narrative. So what I'll do now is we'll just come to our 5-second entry execution and talk about the trade. So I went for the more passive and conservative entry, being trade and funding. I want to make sure that I'm taking the best trades that I can and keep my strike rate high. I understood the possible understanding that we're contained within a bullish swing structure. There are more refined levels above at the more extreme point of this supply, so I was happy to take a more conservative entry, but there was an entry to get in with a 1 pip stop if that's in your plan, and normally I would do, but this was just me trying to play it safe. But what can we see here, right? I'm not going to talk about these ranges at all, but what did we get, okay? Price came up, price came down, price came up. We got our mitigation into our M1 supply, and what could we see, right? We saw this liquidation of these highs. We saw this buy side liquidity get swept, okay? We got the mitigation into our M1 refined zone right here. Okay, we got the mitigation, and then what did price do? Price came back down. We got the small interaction to this demand level right here. We got the price came pulled back up, and then the valid entry would have been stop order right here for a 1 pip stop loss. I played the more passive and conservative entry, being the stop order on the low of this range right here. I'm not going to go into why and talk about the theory and the logic behind why these structural ranges and the expectations of these when we see ranges fail, etc. But basically, I had a stop order here instead of there because I understood potentially the bigger picture play of what could have happened if price could have still wanted to test higher. So I just wanted to make sure I got in a more passive entry, making sure that I had more confirmation that price wanted to come bearish, understanding potential mitigations we had up above. So I had a stop order at the bottom of that range for a 1.8 pip stop, but you could have taken it off that stop order there for a 1 pip stop. And then if we just zoom out and have a look now and see what we got, we can see now that price obviously then started to come down. There's another potential entry here, which I think a lot of people got involved in here. I'm not going to break that down, but then what we understand is, even though that the M15 was bullish, what have we got to remember? What is the high time frame structural expectation, right? We expect to see lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. So if this mitigation is going to hold, what could we see? Well, we expect to see this 15-minute protected low get broken, okay? Because we're at the edge of the range. We're at the sort of extreme of the supply level. We understood that there was potential cause and reason to come and test higher. But what we've got to remember is, what is the bigger picture play here? What is the high time frame objective in this case? And that is to see, and we're trying to catch this lower high before we come and take the new lower low. So you can see, depending on the entry that you took, you could have got in with you could have caught a 1 to 163, or mine, which was a 1 to 90, right? Doesn't matter that I didn't catch the 1 to 163. I'm being transparent. I took the more conservative entry, but still a 1 to 90 on an account is ridiculous, okay? Unfortunately, I did have to close this trade due to being around restricted news events. But that's just breaking this down, and obviously what we can do then is we could understand at this moment in time, if you still believe that price could have come and tested higher, you could have partialed at demand levels, potentially up in here or in here, taking small partials, but then once the protected level went, we then had full structural alignment to come and take this low. So then you'd hold the rest of the volume, as we can see, to come and take this low. And then what can we see here now? The structural expectation of the daily. We can also see now the low of this daily chart has gone right here. So that's just a little short trade recap of a trade that I took on Thursday. If anyone's got any questions, just hit us up in our DMs.